Good morning, brothers and sisters. Yes, I think a number of you may have heard me on this topic. This is definitely my pet subject, we might say. But it's very appropriate in terms of timing. And over the years, I've looked at the story of the donkey numerous times. And I think for those who are joining from Whangarei, they'll remember perhaps a couple of months where, as an ecclesia, we spent a lot of time looking at the donkey on a regular basis. But I keep coming back to it because I find it one of the most amazing stories and really encouraging, and it does come out of our readings today. And it is very appropriate, particularly in terms of the timing of the Jewish calendar, because we are sitting right at the time of the Feast of Passover. So in our readings today, how the donkey comes out is we have the story of the death of Balaam. And so in Numbers chapter 31, it records when Israel goes to fight against Midian that they actually killed Balaam at that time. In verse 7 and 8 of Numbers 31, they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. So was the demise of perhaps the worst animal abuser that was found in Scripture till that day. This was the man, of course, that beat his donkey 3 times. He was an angry man. And in the Proverbs, it talks about what we just read in Proverbs chapter, what did we just read? Proverbs 22, about not going with an angry man. And also it starts with a good name is better or rather to be chosen than great riches. It also goes on in this chapter in Numbers chapter 31 to say they took a great plunder, they took a great spoil, and numbered amongst them was 61,000 donkeys. And I always thought, you know, I wonder what happened to Balaam's donkey. I mean, that was a pretty special one amongst 61,000, pretty much the only talking donkey. And we have no record, of course, what happens to it, and the donkey just disappears. This famous animal, the most famous animal really in the Bible, as a talking donkey, just disappears off the scene. When you look at the story of the donkey in the Bible, it's highlighted for 3 things. It's highlighted because it's a very loyal animal. And it's true that you can see that literally when you see the loyalty of a donkey. It's very loyal to one master. They have an incredible ability to serve. So you see lots of pictures of donkeys being able to carry, you know, 10 times their own weight. They, for a small animal, they're incredibly strong and they're very much willing to serve. But above all else, really in Scripture, the donkey is a picture of humility. In terms of service, you can really see that with Balaam's donkey. Numbers 22 verse 30, the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey that you have ridden ever since I was yours until this day? Have I ever attempted to treat you this way?" And even Balaam had to acknowledge, no, this donkey was very consistent in its service. And whenever you come across the story of the donkey, you'll find that that's one of the things about the donkey is their loyalty and consistency in service. And they're often held up in comparison to unfaithful service and loyalty, like Balaam, or like the story of the disobedient prophet in Kings, who disobeyed God's word, but his donkey was very loyal, and was very faithful and remained beside the dead body of the disobedient prophet, even when a lion was present, which was pretty amazing. So you get quotes like this in Isaiah chapter 1 verse 3. It says, "The ox knows its owner and the donkey its master's manger, but Israel doesn't know, my people do not understand. So the donkey is held up as an animal which is faithful and loyal to its owner. It always comes back to its master's manger, as opposed to Israel, who goes wandering off and you can't find them. They don't come back to their master's manger. In terms of their ability to serve, as I said, donkeys are incredible with their ability to serve. This is a great picture taken from Pakistan during the time of floods. Very amazing because it also shows loyalty, because donkeys don't actually like water. So this donkey's crossing a flooded river with, as you can see, just a small load on its back. And you'll notice that its owner is very carefully talking to it, and its ears are pricked up, listening to its owner, and faithfully, willingly being prepared to go into that water out of its comfort zone in order to carry that load across. So quotes like this, Genesis 49 verse 14, Issachar is a strong-boned donkey lying between two saddlebags. When he sees a good resting place and a pleasant land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and become a slave laborer. And that was the willingness of a donkey to serve. And I really did see this in Pakistan. I couldn't believe it. I was in Islamabad and I was sitting there waiting for a brother who was booking a hotel for us. And I saw these construction workers loading up these donkeys. They had saddlebags, just like is mentioned here in Genesis 49. And they were loading up the saddlebags with these big rocks. And there was two donkeys, and you could see the weight of these rocks as they just kept adding them onto the back of this donkey, and like it was huge what they were taking. And the donkeys weren't on a lead; they were just walking freely. And when he had loaded up one of the donkeys, he gave it a whack on the backside and it trotted off, and the other one just came running up to take its place to be loaded up. And it was like, wow. They actually were wanting, you could see it, the donkey was wanting to actually work. It's almost within the nature and character of the donkey is the willingness and their capacity to serve. So with such an incredible animal, it's amazing that it is just given such a bad rap. Even in the Bible, the donkey's given a real bad rap. So you look at Jeremiah chapter 22, and it says of Jehoiakim, with the burial of a donkey, he shall be buried, dragged and dumped beyond the gates of Jerusalem. So obviously donkeys weren't given much honor and glory, and it was, you know, a terrible thing to be given disrespect and burial. But a donkey just wasn't given any respect and burial, which is sad for the fact of how much of an incredible animal they are. But even in today's society, you know, the donkey's given a pretty bad rap, isn't it? I mean, you got songs about the stinky, wonky donkey. You've got things like piñatas with kids smacking donkeys. You've got people sticking tails on donkeys, and there's poor old Eeyore, the saddest looking donkey around. So even today, we get, you know, donkeys are used in a derogatory way for somebody to be called, you know, a jackass, or that they refer to them in a derogatory way. And I think that's largely because whenever you see the donkey compared to its equine cousin there, the horse, you've got a vast difference in terms of these two different types of animals. The horse, of course, the stallion, is majestic and powerful, and it's used a lot in the Bible in terms of its majesty and power. Whereas a donkey, well, you know, compared to the horse, its ears are too big, its head's too big, its face is too short, its legs are too short, its mane's too short, and really it's just a little bit podgy, isn't it? They're a little bit fat. So when you look at the poor donkey compared to the horse, you know, it's not something that, you know, you don't see cars with a badge or a label at the front with a donkey on it. You do see Ferraris and Mustangs and such like that, but you don't see people putting labels on their cars with a donkey. Hence the reason why when you go through history, you have all the great powerful kings love to be seen on, you know, stallions and horses, or riding chariots. Napoleon, of course, he suffered a little bit of short man's disease, but this is a painting that Napoleon had painted a number of times, original paintings. A famous painting of the crossing of the Alps of St. Bernard, May 20 in the 1800s. And that's a picture of him crossing the Alps on his stallion. Truth be known, Napoleon wasn't a very good horseman. He couldn't ride a horse properly because he was so short, horses were so big, he tended to fall off them. So he actually crossed over the Alps on a belligerent mule. And so that's the truth of the story. And no one really wanted to paint the truth of Napoleon, who probably didn't actually know which end of the donkey to ride. In terms of Israel, Israel was commanded that they weren't to acquire to themselves horses. When they came out of Egypt, they took the spoils of Egypt, and one of the things they weren't to take was horses. And it says in Deuteronomy that of the kings that were to come, they were not to acquire to themselves horses or to cause the people to return to Egypt, or in order to acquire horses, since you shall never return that way. And one of the things was the horse, as far as Israel was concerned, was a symbol of the nation of Egypt. It was a symbol of the darkness that they had come out of. And of course, for Egypt, you see the chariots and the power of Egypt. The symbol of Pharaoh's chariots was a symbol of Egyptian power. So Isaiah 31 says, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are strong. But they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor consult the Lord. In fact, when they went to war, Israel, in the times of Joshua and in the times of the judges, they were actually commanded that when they took spoils, they were not to take horses. In fact, they were to hamstring the horses so that they became useless for war and could only be used in service or in agriculture. So the Lord said to Joshua, don't be afraid of them tomorrow because of all their chariots. I will give them over to you, and you will hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So that's Joshua chapter 11. So God made it very, very clear to Israel that they weren't to have an association with horses. And that's how it started. And the reason why, I guess, because, you know, the donkey's not really a pretty sort of majestic war animal. You don't kind of think of the donkey as a war animal. And when you read the early parts of the Judges, you find that the Judges, and the times right through all the Judges, that they had donkeys. So here's one in Judges chapter 5, verse 9 and 10. We know Deborah had a donkey, but in this one it talks about the governors of Israel who actually acquired white donkeys. So they did kind of elevate the donkey a little bit. They managed to find some albino ones, which separated them and made themselves a little bit more important. The problem was when Israel went to war and they came across Sisera and his army and his chariots and his power. Imagine meeting in the battlefield where you're sending your military leader out to meet this huge chariot and this massive army, and you're riding a donkey. It was kind of humiliating when they met in the middle of the battlefield. And that's what God wanted, so that they wouldn't trust in horses and the power and the might of the horse, but they would trust in him. But of course, Israel, you know, humans being humans, don't like that humiliating appearance. And so what happened was, over time in Israel, they made a compromise. And they introduced the mule. And you'll find that the mule is introduced in the time of David. And the mule, of course, is a cross between a horse and a donkey. And so what you find is that David's sons in Samuel were the first ones mentioned in the Bible to own their own mules. And the mule was never used in the Bible until you get to this story in Samuel. 1 Samuel 13 verse 29 is the first appearance of the mule. Up until then, all the leaders in Israel, all the governors and all the judges only rode donkeys. But now there's a compromise because they wanted the bigger animal. So it wasn't quite as humiliating to go out and meet in the battlefield. David, in fact, was made king, and a lot of people, you know, the inauguration of David as being made king as he rode into Jerusalem, he rode in on a female mule, or a molly. 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 33. But then, of course, what happens with all compromises when you start a compromise? So what started going from the ass and went to the mule, after David came Solomon. And Solomon, of course, just went right overboard. He had 40,000 horses and stables and chariots. And after Solomon, all future kings of Israel and Judah are seen as riding on horses or on chariots drawn by horses. There is never a mention of a king riding either a mule or an ass from the days of Solomon. In fact, there's never a mention in the Bible of any king riding a donkey. But God has chosen the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God's chosen the weak things of this world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, the things which are despised. God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing those things that are. And so, of course, this famous quote, a prophecy concerning the Lord Jesus Christ coming in humility. Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9. Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king's coming to you. He is just, having salvation, and he is lowly, riding on an ass, and upon the colt, the foal of an ass. Now, if you haven't noticed before in Zechariah, in chapter 9, if you can look to Zechariah chapter 9 at this quote, look at what it says in the next verse. So in the next verse it says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. So in the context of Jesus coming meek and lowly, riding into Jerusalem, God says, I will cut off the chariot and the war horse and the battle bow, and he shall speak peace to the nations. So this symbol of Jesus riding into Jerusalem upon a donkey is a symbol of coming in peace and the end of war, but it's also a symbol of breaking the reliance and the confidence that Israel had upon the horse, because they did eventually go down to Egypt and buy horses, and Solomon, of course, introduced horses, and ever since the time of David, all the kings relied on the power and strength of the horse. But there's something else in this verse really interesting. You'll notice that it's not just one donkey that's mentioned here. In fact, there's actually three. When you look at the Hebrew here in Zechariah chapter 9, it says, rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king's coming unto you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass. That first word for ass is the male donkey. It's what we would call the jackass. And upon a colt. That's a foal of a donkey, and it's neither, it's not gender specific. It could be male or female, but the colt, the foal of an ass, that's a different word. That is the female the Jenny ass. So there's actually 3 animals being mentioned here in Zechariah chapter 9. And the only other time these 3 are found together is found in the prophecy of Genesis chapter 49, where it says in Genesis chapter 49 concerning the one that would come from Judah. It says the scepter, or the king, would not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh come. The word for Shiloh has the idea of tribute, to pay tribute, until the one who deserves tribute, and in fact I think some translations say that, and under him shall the obedience of all people be, or in some translations, the gathering together of all people, binding his foal to the vine and his ass's colt to the choice vine. Those are actually the same 3 animals. So the first word for foal is again the male donkey, and then the ass's colt is the female, the Jenny, and the foal. So here in Genesis 49, if you've got the 3 animals again being mentioned, that Jesus is going to do. Or in fact, it's really only 2 animals, because it's the foal and the ass's colt, but all 3 are mentioned in that phrase. So what does it mean? What's this idea in Genesis 49 that he's going to come and he's going to bind, or the idea is to tether, to tie up a colt to a vine? So you're going to find something that's running stray, and you're going to find these asses and you're going to tie them to the vine. Well, the vine, of course, is always a symbol of God's vineyard. Isaiah chapter 5, the vineyard of the Almighty. Jesus, of course, told lots of parables about God's vineyard. He even said, I am the true vine. As far as the nation of Israel is concerned, God said of them, they've gone to Assyria like a wild donkey wandering away on their own, and they've sold herself to many lovers. So you get this picture of Israel as God's inheritance, the vine, and the donkey as being a symbol of Israel going astray. When you're introduced in the Bible to the first king of Israel, it's interesting, his description. He's kind of the stallion. He's the perfect dimensions. He's head and shoulders above every man. So 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 2 is the story about Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul, his father's name was Kish, had a son called Saul who was a very handsome man, good looking. And there was no more handsome than Saul. He stood a head taller than any other man in Israel. This was your stallion. He was magnificent, was Saul. And it's interesting, in verse 3, what is Saul doing when you're first introduced to him? One day, Kish's donkeys got lost. So he said to his son Saul, take one of your servants and go and look for the donkeys. And Saul went to look for the donkeys. So you're introduced to this picture of this magnificent king searching for lost donkeys. What you discover is they don't find the donkeys. They look everywhere. And then Saul makes this comment and says, I think my father's probably worrying about me more than the donkeys now. We should go home. And Saul was concerned that his father would be more concerned about his life than the life of the stray donkeys. Hence, we come to Jesus. The picture of Jesus entering into Jerusalem. You'll notice in this picture and in this scene, as people are paying tribute and putting palms down in front of Jesus, that in this story, in that story of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, the role of the donkey, as we find in Matthew chapter 21, was to lift Jesus head and shoulders above every person. Because when you ride on a horse, you are miles above everybody. You are huge. You are elevated because of the size of the horse. But when you ride a donkey, really you are just above the average height donkey, and the average height person means that you are just above the height of the rest of the people. And the story in Matthew's record is the story of this incredible servant who was used to lift Jesus head and shoulders above every person. And you'll find in Matthew, when you look at that record we just read, that there were two animals. So when you look at this, it says in verse Matthew 21, now as they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, go to a village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Bring them to me. This fulfilled Genesis 49, where it says, until Shiloh come, binding his ass to the vine and his ass's colt to the choice vine. And it also fulfilled Zechariah chapter 9. Behold, your king cometh unto you, meek and lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon the colt, the foal of an ass. And I think between these two symbols, between the ass and the colt, the foal of an ass, was one of them symbolized natural Israel. And that's the one Jesus did not ride, because when Jesus came to his own received him not. And when he ought to have been riding upon the adult donkey, Israel, they received him not. And so he ended up, according to Mark's gospel, riding on the colt, whereupon never a man sat. And this was an introduction to the Gentiles, because God would call a nation bringing forth fruits thereof. And so when it says in Genesis 49, unto him shall the gathering of all people be, binding two animals, the ass back to the vine, but then introducing the ass's colt, one that had never had anyone sit upon it, to the choice vine, binding it to the choice vine, that is to himself. I am the true vine. And for us, here we are, a couple of thousand years later, we are that donkey that elevates Jesus into glory, to give tribute and to bring him into the city of God. So the Passover started on Palm Sunday with the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem upon an ass. But in the story of the Passover, it's all about the story of the redemption of the firstborn. And although the Passover is all about the lamb, there is one other animal mentioned specifically in relation to the Passover, and that is the donkey. Why, after the story of the redemption of the firstborn, does it say in Exodus chapter 13, every firstling of a donkey you must redeem with a lamb? And if you don't redeem it, you must break its neck. Every firstborn of your sons you must redeem. And in this story, brothers and sisters, is the power of our exhortation. This is our take-home point. Where the nation of Israel did not value the donkey, where the donkey was a despised animal, and in the burial of a donkey, it was a derogatory phrase, and it's the same today. God's value of the donkey is completely different. God valued the donkey enough to say, you know what the price of a donkey is? If you want to redeem a donkey, it's going to cost a lamb. And you might think, well, that's not a lot. Every family in Israel had just had the Passover. And every family was redeemed by the price of a lamb. And God is saying in this story in Exodus chapter 13 that the value of the donkey was exactly the same as the value of every family in Israel. And what it's really saying is that that's the way God saw the donkey, as the price that's been paid. So the donkey was used in war, but here's a story of a picture of a donkey that was used in war, famous donkey. The man here is John Kirkpatrick, and he was known as the Good Samaritan of Gallipoli, and he had the Red Cross donkey that was always carrying people, sick people, and through the battles. And the picture beside it, of course, is the picture of the Good Samaritan who came and found the man who was beaten and stripped and half naked and laid it upon his own beast. And Jesus would say, come unto me, all you that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul.